Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Judge Kavanaugh, if you want to continue to look at the chair, you can, because he gave me the time. Mr. Chair, I'd like a unanimous consent to introduce some documents for the record. First is from 13 states' attorneys generals who, among other things, said that Judge Kavanaugh has an unshakable respect for the proper role of the courts within the constitutional structure. I have an op-ed from the New Hampshire union leader. Among other things, they said that Kavanaugh is an experienced, well-qualified pick. Another document is from 80 former law students at Harvard Law. They say Judge Kavanaugh consistently encouraged the students to voice different viewpoints, even if others or the judge himself might disagree. Another document written, or I should say an article written by Jonathan Turley of The Hill, who says that no one can use the Mueller probe to hold up the Supreme Court nominee. Another document from Salvador Rizzo from the Washington Post. And basically, the question is, does Brett Kavanaugh think that the president is immune from criminal charges? And his assumption or his assertion is that Kavanaugh does not think so. Ed Whelan, National Review, Dem's latest documents hullabaloo. Catholic Charities CEO, someone that I know Judge Kavanaugh has worked closely with, he says, I know Brett to be a man committed to his community and to those less fortunate. Catholic Youth Organization, basketball parents, and I might add, I coached my kids, and I actually think that parents are the toughest constituency to get support from. And you apparently have done that, and they've submitted letters to that effect. Also, a letter from the Charleston Post and Courier editorial board, Kavanaugh, the right choice. From the Boston Herald staff, nix the toxic, give Brett Kavanaugh a shot. From William Whitaker, the president of the Washington Jesuit Academy, lauding Judge Kavanaugh for the work that he's done for tutoring over the past several years. From my former colleagues in the House, a letter from the majorities of the House and Senate supporting Brett Kavanaugh's nomination. From my lieutenant governor supporting same. And finally, a letter from the DOJ dated August the 5th, 2005 in response to Senator Joe Biden at the time's request for Justice Roberts' information. I think it's a very interesting read. Now, before I make some comments and hope to keep the record alive for yielding back the most.
Wait a minute. You asked permission to put them in the record. Without objection, so ordered. Proceed.
First, before I get started, I think it's really important. I ran over to a convenience store when I was taking a break and thinking, I'm taking a break. The other members are taking a break. Hopefully Judge Kavanaugh did. The ones who weren't taking a break were the staff. So I'd like to thank the staff on both sides of the aisle. I know you work hard. And to the police who are working mandatory 16-hour shifts. You know, it's one thing. It's hard. It's very difficult for those of you facing forward to see what they're doing, but I don't think you understand the complex operation and the work they're doing to keep us all safe, and those who are exercising their First Amendment rights safe. And finally, to the chair, thank you. You've done a great job, as you always do, and I appreciate your fairness. I love your sense of humor, and I look forward to us continuing this for probably about another 5 hours. Now I've got to get on to a few things. And, you know, Judge, I was Speaker of the House in North Carolina for 4 years, and when we'd get into extended debates and our conference would meet at a break, I would say, guys, if it's already been said, don't say it again. So there's not a whole lot more I'm going to say. Clearly, we've got an impasse here, but the impasse didn't start based on the discussions we had over the last 3 days. The impasse started, in some cases, before you were ever nominated. There were people on the other side of the aisle, including people on this committee, who opposed your nomination on a fill-in-the-blank basis before you were ever nominated. And all they did is fill in the blank on July 10th. These are the assertions people made. They already concluded before they saw the first document, and they weren't going to change their mind. Now, they do deserve getting as many documents as possible, and they'll have more time to get documents. I want to make a point on the 1,000 documents that the senator from New Jersey mentioned. It's actually 1,000 pages, not 1,000 documents, so let's just be sure, be clear on volume. And let's also be clear that those documents are publicly available. And let's also be clear that the record will be held open until early next week, so additional questions for the record, I assume, and other information can be submitted. Next week, you'll go into the hearing, or you'll go into the committee, you'll be held over. That's another week. The following week, you'll go to committee, we'll have debates again. Another opportunity for comments to be made by the same members who've already made up their mind. And then hopefully the following week, you'll be on the floor. And every member will have an opportunity to have their say on the floor. So for anybody to say that this discussion is over and the discovery is over the next couple of hours is simply creating theater. Now I want to talk a little bit about theater. I want to talk about what happened last night. I did something I seldom do. I seldom interrupt another member, regardless of how much I want to talk. Last night was the first time of probably only 3 times in the 3.5 years I've been in the U.S. Senate. But the reason I did it is I felt like we were going down a path that subsequently proved to be true. And at the time, Senator Kennedy was chairing. He rightfully allowed the discussion to go. But I want to talk about the timeline that occurred and then what happened this morning. So at about 9:30 last night, we had an exchange where you were being asked to respond to something that you hadn't seen. We subsequently found out it was because it was committee confidential. And again, I'm not an Ivy School attorney, but I really feel like when you got in 30-point type running diagonally across the page, something that says committee confidential, you probably ought not read verbatim from it. But that's what happened last night. But about 9:30 last night, a request was made to release those documents. That's one of the reasons why I thank the staff, because those staff stayed up until about 4 a.m. this morning, talking first with President Bush's people, then talking with the White House and getting it cleared, and they were cleared and in an email box at about 3:15 this morning, 3:30. Now, I don't expect somebody to check their email at 3:15 or 3:30. Maybe some of you do. But certainly, in the 6 hours between the time that email hit your email box and the theatrics that happened on this, in this chamber today, you could have actually found out that you didn't have to be Spartacus. You didn't have to go interact with civil disobedience. You got what you wanted. Could have come in here and started out, had a discussion about it if you wanted to, incorporated it into the discussion today. But that would have given you an opportunity to put that in the proper context, so perhaps it wasn't as helpful. The fact of the matter is what happened today and what's happened subsequent to this afternoon reminds me of something I'm more likely to see at the Kennedy Center. Maybe a version of Much Ado About Nothing, but not really appropriate for what we're doing here. Now, I've noticed, I love watching people and body language. And I have noticed you, I have had hash marks for the number of times we've been interrupted. I just didn't think I could keep track of the number of times that you touched that pocket Constitution. And I have to know, and I know it's tattered, it's almost a metaphor for the very document itself, challenged, kind of torn through, but kept together, largely intact. Hopefully will continue to be intact. But do you have a story behind that pocket Constitution?
Well, I got it about 25 years ago. I know that because the 27th Amendment, which was ratified in 1992, is not in my version. So I have written in 27th Amendment in my handwriting, and then I've used it each year teaching my classes at Harvard Law School on separation of powers in the Constitution, and I've written a lot of notes, and there's a lot of ink in there. And the assignment on for the first day of class, the students have to read the entire Constitution word for word. And for the last day of class, they have to read the entire Constitution word for word. And on the first day of class, for about the first hour or hour and a half, I give them a tour of the Constitution. So I start with the beginning and kind of roll through the whole thing. Article 1, I go through the different clauses. Article 2, Article 3, Article 4, go through the whole thing. Article 5, Article 6, then we go through the amendments. But I really focus on the original text of the Constitution because people have heard a lot about a lot of the individual amendments, although I point out some of the ones that aren't always discussed as much. But I go through the structure because I try to explain how the structure fits together to protect individual liberty. And some of the clauses about how the House of Representatives and the power of Congress, the power of the Senate, how that all fit together, the different...
I just find it remarkable that in spite of your encyclopedic knowledge, that you keep it with you and you always refer back to it. And the fact that you've had it for 25 years is a testament to those cheap pocket constitutions.
I will say that when I met with Senator Feinstein, I wish she were here, but she saw this because she talked about how much she appreciated the words of the Constitution, and I pulled it out, and she said, well, that looks tattered, and she gave me a new one. So if this thing ever totally falls apart, and hers has the 27th Amendment in it, so if this falls apart, I told her I would use her copy for future.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to ask you a few other personal questions, but also, I started out by saying we know where everybody was beforehand because people made public statements. We know people want more documents, you have more time. If you have more questions, ask them and submit them for the record. If you want more documents, request them because they've been, in each and every case, granted. Don't wait until the day before the floor to say I haven't gotten the document when now you've had a running clock since August the 22nd to request some documents that were actually cleared overnight. I also want to point to this. I don't understand how somebody with that kind of track record, with either judges appointed by a Democratic president and judges appointed by a Republican president on the 7th, on the district court or the D.C. Circuit, could actually be viewed in such a divisive way. I don't see how somebody who has clearly judged on both sides of the issues here. Sometimes you've judged in a way that made some of my folks mad, and sometimes you've judged in a way that made some of their folks mad. But I think if we go back and really examine this has been a political exercise more than anything else. I, for one, think you should be very proud of that record. And I, for one, will not be surprised if you don't have meet or exceed that when you get on the bench. And that's the last thing I want to talk about. Last night I went through some of the cases, and I kept on going through more. But, folks, let's get real. Read his opinions. And the amazing thing about these opinions, I'd never read an opinion. I read a few when I was Speaker, but not many. I first started reading opinions when Justice Gorsuch was in front of us. And the first thing that I was amazed with is how approachable they are. You don't have to read all the footnotes. If you're like me, you can read the summary. You get the point. You can go to some of the footnotes, but read them. Because if you do, you'll be amazed by them. Don't judge it based on a tweet or some sort of get out and protest. Read them. John Locke, I think, said to prejudge other men's notions before we've looked into them, it's not to show their darkness, but to put out our own eyes. Don't put out your eyes. You may disagree, but you may want to take a look at how thoughtful all of Judge Gorsuch's 307 opinions are. I said Gorsuch and Judge Kavanaugh. So look, just look at it. Go away. I walked over to this convenience store to get me some kombucha and come back here and I was just thinking, and I talked to some people there. Apparently they were in the audience. I think they were clearly on the other side. And they said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm getting a drink." And I said, look, what really bothers me is how we go into this process and we take these incredible people and you wonder why they do it. So that's the last thing. And I told them the same thing. I said, read some of his opinions. Don't believe what you've been told. Don't judge someone based on someone other's judgment. Judge them based on the body of work. And your body of work extends long before the 12 years that you've actually been in the role of public service. And that's what I'm going to end with. I actually started public service about the same time you did, Judge Kavanaugh. Actually, we have, I think, some similarities. I was a partner at a Big Four accounting firm. I traveled all over the place. I have 2 kids. I coached their t-ball, their soccer. I was sometimes flying in for practice on Monday night and trying to get home on Friday night to be on the ball fields. I then went into the legislature in 2011. That's really the first time I did, or 2007, I should say, public service, and then became Speaker of the House and came up here. And sometimes when I'm in settings like this, I ask myself the question I'm about to ask you. Why on earth do you do this, and why on earth do you want to do it? You're brilliant. You've augmented your God-given talents with extraordinary education, and you've served so extraordinarily well. You know well that in the private sector, your potential is endless. So in the remaining time, and whatever you don't use, I'll yield back. Why on earth are you doing this?
Sir, I appreciate that. I'm doing it, been a judge and doing this and going through this process because from an early age, I've tried to commit myself to public service. As I've talked about, the motto of our Jesuit high school was men for others. And that motto of public service is something I've always tried to pursue. And following the example set by my mom of law, and I found that an important way to contribute to public service, and then became, of course, a lawyer. And within public service, as a lawyer, I think one of the highest forms, not the only, but one of the highest forms of public service as a lawyer is to be a judge, because our rule of law in this country, our rights and liberties, depend on independent, neutral, impartial judges, and I thought I could contribute in that way to the public service and the rule of law. And so when that opportunity arose, I was honored to be considered and honored to become a judge. And I've enjoyed and been honored to do it for the last 12 years because I know that it's not abstract, it's not academic, it has real effects for real people in the real world. And being part of the process of our government by which the rights and liberties of people are protected in the real world was the highest form of public service. At the same time, I've recognized that that's not the only way to contribute. So as I've mentioned before, sought to teach. I sought in hiring law clerks to train the next generation, teaching the Constitution. Sought to volunteer with Father John and at Washington Jesuit Academy. Coaching has been just an enormous part of the last 7 years, and then my family. So, but the public service as a judge is it's a great honor, and it's a great responsibility. To the discussion I just had with Senator Booker, I understand the responsibility I bear as a nominee to this court. I appreciate that. I hope my experience gives me the ability to, if I were to be confirmed, to live up to that responsibility. I'll give it my all if I'm confirmed, as I've tried to do for the last 12 years. So thank you for the question.
Judge Kavanaugh, thank you. Thank you for what you're going through. Thank you for your past service and what I believe is going to be a distinguished career on the bench. And God bless you and your family. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you for the 2 minutes you didn't use. Senator